I'm Holly Middleton. I'm part of IBM Consulting's AI leadership team here in the UK. And in the past 12 to 18 months, I've been nearly exclusively focused on helping our clients take generative AI use cases from POC and experiment into actual productionized use cases, particularly in clients within the regulated industries.
Thank you, Holly. My name's Fiona Heslin. I am an associate partner in our AI and analytics practice in IBM Consulting UK. And I've been delivering AI implementations over the last 9 years. So in particular, over the last 12 months, how do we move that from looking at AI concepts, moving into deeper generative AI models? And one of the areas we want to talk through is some of the challenges that we have seen over that time and some recommendations on how to overcome some of these obstacles. So generative AI has taken the world by storm. We're very familiar with that. The pace of the innovation technology is quicker than we could ever have imagined. It's changing the way that we work. It's changing the way that we live. It's changing the way that we see the world at a pace of change that we couldn't even humanly recognize. The number of users using ChatGPT in the first week, the number of users using ChatGPT in the first month is showing how quickly our customer experience, but also our expectations, practically changed overnight. So it goes without saying, the speed, the scope, and the impact is unprecedented, but it's actually quite hard to make it real, and it's actually really hard to embed all of these concepts into the whole wider organizational operating model, not just a technical implementation. The impact of generative AI, so seeing potential 7% increase in GDP over the next 10 years, looking at approximately 50% of the workforce using generative AI concepts to augment their day-to-day processes, means that yes, we don't just want to be testing and learning with proof of concepts. We have to think about how we embed this, and we're all on this journey together. We're all pretty much at the start, meaning we all have the chance to get this right from day one. So previous implementations of AI, we're all very familiar with artificial intelligence. We've seen it looking at traditional data concepts, so collecting, organizing, and analyzing, and then thinking about how AI can be added on top. So very much an AI plus, a plus AI mindset. That's changing. Thought leaders are now expected to be infusing artificial intelligence right at the very front. So thinking about how strategies on how we can be designing products, how we can be designing new services, how we can be designing new processes with AI at the forefront, and then thinking about workflows, and then thinking about how we can organize our data structurally in accordance with this strategy. That's the mindset shift that we're really trying to encourage, AI first.
Yeah, so if we can mature along that AI ladder and leverage generative AI, the achievable benefits are, of course, immense. 3 to 4 trillion US dollars expected to be added to the economy within the next 10 years. Significant productivity gains. It's going to allow us to do a lot more and deal with the complexity that we all find in our day-to-day lives. Enterprises and software vendors are all well and truly baking in generative AI into their strategic roadmaps because of the gains that you can achieve. And when we look at what's been the primary focus within use cases, it's very much text-based dominated use cases. So text and content summarization, text and content generation, analyzing large forms of text database, and what we are seeing is a move into more of a focus on multimodal, so more modalities, video, audio, and other, which will actually then increase those benefits on the side of the screen. When we think about where clients focusing most, I won't go through all of these. I'm sure you've all had conversations about use cases, but the key takeaway here is that every part of the organization is seeing the potential of leveraging generative AI. A few standouts: up to 60% productivity improvement within application modernization, so in the developer community, which I assume many of the people in the audience today come from. Also 50% productivity improvements in using generative AI to modernize your data lakehouses. And then, of course, an incredible opportunity within customer servicing and how you can actually gain a lot more insight from your call and chat data to actually improve the service that you deliver. So with this incredible benefit, incredible potential, and a much faster path to delivering from idea through to solution, why are organizations still sort of struggling to actually scale their generative AI use cases? And not even just scale, but actually roll out and go live with their first productionized use case. Fiona and I have been helping clients with this exact challenge. We'll be talking about some of the common challenges that we have observed, and most importantly for the people in this room, what are the key areas that you could focus on to address this. And the key thing that we'll be talking about are actual organizational challenges. So this presentation won't be about technology. This is about the types of things that everyone in this room can influence and support within your organization so that you can make this real and start leveraging those benefits.
So challenge number one, actually preparing for change and overcoming some of the resistance. As Holly mentioned, we often think about generative AI as a technical first implementation. How can we be using these models to the best of our ability? How do we embed these models into our organization? What are the approvals that we need to go through? But actually, it's much broader than that. We need to be thinking about organizational shift across all areas of the operating model, looking at the people and processes, looking at the support model, looking at how we make and communicate what's happening in the organization available to all. So a couple of the obstacles we've seen. So first of all, lack of strategic approach. We often see a generative AI strategy happening in particular departments testing and learning, particular departments running proof of concepts and then sharing some of the value. Lack of innovation. So actually, how do we enable all areas of an organization to share some of their thoughts, share some of their examples, share some of their ideas on how generative AI can augment their processes, but how it can also augment the organization as a whole. We don't often see those forums available for every single person to be able to share those ideas. Lack of education. For me, this is probably one of the most important and one of the most critical areas. Educating our workforce, being able to share the training necessary so everybody can build this skills gap, and understanding, first of all, what the terminology means, and then understanding how it can be utilized in our day-to-day jobs, as well as a much broader proof of concepts such as summarization and some of the other examples you saw on the previous slide. And having a tech-first approach, so not thinking about the business value, the business purpose, or the business strategy around a proof of concept, but trying to get involved so we can be seen to be using generative AI because it's the next buzzword. There must be a much bigger and a much broader benefits case because those are the proof of concepts that are going to succeed. All of these obstacles leads to a fear of the unknown. Without the education, without the communication, we're struggling to get our workforce on board with actually the impact that this technology can and will have. So how are we overcoming some of those challenges? First of all, demystify AI. There is a lot of buzzwords going around. There's a lot of areas within an organization that doesn't understand the benefit of an LLM, benefit of prompt tuning, what foundation models are. Actually running these education courses and being able to explain and demystify some of these terms is key. Second, encourage a transparent environment. So we've seen some really successful implementations of hackathons, 24-hour hackathons with all areas of an organization where every single team member gets the chance to play around with the technology, play around with some ideas, or if they have no idea kind of what use case they should be embedding, actually join a team so they can get a bit more familiar with what's happening and what this can do. And finally, educate. So implementing training courses. We've seen mandatory training being implemented across a number of organizations to help this skills gap. And if I can give an example of where this has been really significant, think about a contact center. So contact center are the SMEs of an organization from a customer experience perspective. They know your customers the best, they know what their customers want, and they know how to resolve a customer query. If we can start implementing training schemes with departments such as the customer service center, they are going to be the next AI skill set of the future.
Okay. Moving on to challenge 2, so unclear operating model when it comes to how you will manage the AI lifecycle, so beyond experiment. This challenge comes about when you start by focusing purely on the right now, testing, experimenting, and not thinking about answering the question of we've had a successful POC, we really want to roll this out, where to next? And these are types of answers that we need across development. So who is going to actually scale this solution? Who's going to build additional features? How will you manage on the other side of development? Who will maintain it? Who is going to manage path to live, acceptance into service type activity? What are the key risk policies and the risk management frameworks that need adaptation for the future of generative AI? Who will govern this, track how many generative AI use cases are in the business, how they're performing, who's managing them, who's monitoring them? Is the operation actually ready for this solution, and how will you manage that sort of flow between those key entities? How will we measure the performance, not just of the model, but actually of the use case as well, and more. And without answers to these key questions, it breeds low confidence from the business in your AI capability, which ultimately then leads to some inertia and some sort of stagnation about moving forward and next steps. Also, without this systematic approach, you do end up with pockets of duplicate activity. You might have a team in the contact center space creating their own development process and their own development team and interacting with risk independently. At the same time, you'll have someone in audit doing the same thing and someone in digital doing the same thing. And what you can see is that's going to slow the process down, and sadly, you miss the opportunity for this repeatable pattern and an ability to actually optimize something that's been agreed more centrally. So for example, if you have a use case that's using generative AI to help generate templated letters that go to your customers, and then in another part of the business, they also need to use generative AI to develop a templated document. It might be a different document type, but without joining those dots, you're losing out on the learnings of that implementation, and also you're going to the same groups of people with questions just asked in a slightly different way. And that leads to inefficiency and, of course, a lot of time. How do we overcome this? So the first point I would say is don't wait until you have it all worked out and have an agreement from your top of your leadership house that you're going to have a complete AI capability, fully staffed teams, fully staffed IT support functions. Instead, start with operating model iteration 1. What's your minimal viable approach to answering those questions of how you'll organize yourself to successfully deliver AI? So for example, where will the data come from? Who will manage that and make sure that it's prepared? How will innovation ideas be fed into this capability? Who will then coordinate the delivery lifecycle? Who will be the key function for how it will be governed? And ultimately, who will deliver it? And underpinning all of that, how will you update all of your enterprise frameworks to actually accommodate generative AI? Second point is about making sure that you engage representatives across the organization. So never before has the statement, AI is a team sport, been more true. It's not just about data scientists, ML engineers, and your tech leadership. This is where we really need to bring on the journey the risk partners, your security partners, people in comms as well, to think about how this impacts the workforce, and also, of course, folks across other entities in the business. Involve them early in that operating model design, and you won't have stumbling blocks later when you're ready for production. And the last point is consider your scaled build and run state early. So even though I just said make sure you have an iteration 1 operating model, I'm not implying that you should absolutely have the other side of the process worked out, but start the conversations early. Because when you think about support models and building new capabilities potentially within the functions of your organization, and who will finance this, and how will we monitor it, and how will we prioritize use cases between different departments, all of these things take a long time to decide and a long time to mobilize. So the conversation needs to happen a lot sooner than you might think. Okay. Moving on to challenge 3. So this challenge we've witnessed, it comes about when you attempt to approach risk management using traditional methods and mechanisms, but the generative AI paradigm doesn't allow for that. Why? When you see the build to deploy line here, LLMs allow us to do a lot more and a lot faster. So with traditional AI, when you build a model from the ground up, that could take many months or years. Now, in the same space of time, we could see tens of generative AI use cases being ready for production. And this process and key elements of your risk framework will all be aligning to a typical timeline. So they take time, they're very hefty, and of course you have full control over your AI model, so there's a lot more you can provide. When we bring in LLMs and foundation models, there's also the dynamic of third party, because the overwhelming trend is procuring and purchasing use of these foundation models and LLMs from major vendors using, GBTs, for example, or Granites from IBM. So you now bring in an extra dynamic of procuring the right organization as well. So this challenge, how it actually presents itself, is if you don't have an adapted way of working for generative AI, you end up with a blanket approach. So a more is more, which might make sense for your first use case, but needs to streamline quickly after. And that can lead to disproportionate controls. So instead of having something that quite clearly makes sense, particularly in comparison to your manual process, you end up with a huge raft of risks, controls, documentation requirements. When you multiply the fact that this isn't just model risk, this is also people risk, operational risk, etc., you can quite quickly see that there could become an entire industry around this, and the sort of timeline to benefit gets pushed further and further away. The other challenge is procurement teams are often overlooked. As I just mentioned, they're becoming more and more important in this discussion around risk management for generative AI use cases. They should really be thinking about how they ensure the right AI comes into the business, because they're the front doors. So how are you embedding the right AI questions into your RFP process? How are you updating your third-party risk management framework? And ideally pushing a little bit of the onus onto your vendors to supply some of this information that you need to be compliant. And lastly, I'm sure anyone in this room that's dealt with risk departments or is from risk departments knows that there are many different flavors and many different teams. And oftentimes their requirements, if it's coming from data security or model risk oversight, model risk management, first-line risk partners, they're all asking for very similar things. And that can lead to an absolute overinflation of what's being asked of the teams that are trying to develop these use cases, and that leads to, obviously, time away from building the value-generating tools. So how can we overcome this? The first is to bring all those entities together, make sure that you're deduplicating their requirements, but also pair them with the teams that are building the tech, because there is an education. We often are finding that we're getting the same questions about building a machine learning model from the ground up when we're talking about a generative AI large language model and using a foundation model. And a lot of the times it's not a relevant risk or control when it's in that situation. So we need to sort of clarify that. The second, which is my favorite, is the repeatability is key. So what you'll end up finding with these generative AI use cases is that there are clear trends and patterns in the types of use cases. So I mentioned content summarization, content analysis and evaluation, content creation. And if you take that down to a level of granularity, there will be some sub-themes within that. Rather than each time you deploy one of these use cases or themes, coming up with a whole set of risks and controls, what you can do is actually have a rule-based taxonomy around what was the theme or the pattern, what was the materiality of this use case to your business, and also in which function did it apply. And from that, you can get a preset list of these are the appropriate controls and the appropriate sort of risk management methods to actually move forward faster in a consistent way. And then lastly, we do need to plan capacity for compliance. We never should, or we never will, and never should we remove compliance from this equation at all. The cost of realizing the benefits of generative AI will be, in one part, the cost of the compliance aspect on the other side of it. So make sure that when we are thinking about that pipeline and all of those use cases coming down towards this team, that we're thinking about capacity for evaluating models and use cases, and on the other side of it for ongoing monitoring.
So challenge number 4, understanding your data availability, and the quality of your data. So we're at a big data conference, but the power of data in generative AI use cases just cannot be underestimated. AI systems absolutely thrive on data. yet it can be the single limiting factor to making a proof of concept successful or not. So what are some of the areas that we see as key challenges? Reviewing your current infrastructure to see if it's set up for scale. Can it cope with the volumes of data that are predicted in the next 1 month, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? Is your data available and accessible? Can you merge your data sources together? Because this is what is going to be required when it comes to feeding data into a generative AI model. When did you last check the quality of the data? Is there a lot of duplicate data in there? Is there invalid data in your data warehouses at the moment? All of these questions can help start to mitigate the risk of hallucinations. And then also, who has access to your data? Data is going to need to be accessible to all, but there's some areas, including PII data, that you, of course, only want to have accessible by those who are in need of it. So how do we overcome some of these challenges? Well, first and foremost, prepare and review your data management strategy. An AI strategy cannot be seen as its own strategy, its own subset. It has to be an AI plus data strategy. The two coexist with each other. Secondly, the data governance principles. And this needs to be a continuous process. This is not just a one and done activity. This is ongoing. And there's plenty of talks in the data and governance theatre today just to stress the importance of this. Governance can often be seen as a blocker, but actually governance is a real key enabler to making generative AI work at scale, but that's not often thought of. And then finally, the ethical implications of your data. Making sure your data is not biased, making sure your data is diverse, making sure your data aligns to your company values. We don't often see our own bias as humans, so that's why having a data governance process is absolutely critical, so it can continue to evolve and continue to stream.
Okay, so these are the challenges and the ways to overcome for generative AI today. But what's coming next? So what we're seeing in the market is agentic use cases. So agentic use cases are when you have large language models, agents, that are actually fulfilling the tasks autonomously. So it's more about training them about the outcome that you want rather than each individual step. Then we're seeing much more use of multimodal, which I mentioned at the start, but the trend will go to more enterprise-ready solutions. This, of course, will be organization dependent. Not every organization will need this in a big way, but this is where we're seeing it going. Further advancements towards artificial general intelligence, I think we'll see this incrementally. And then embedded generative AI within all major software providers. Absolutely. I'm sure we can all see that today. Our vendors, everyone in this room is wanting to talk to you about their generative AI functionality. So overcoming these challenges that we've mentioned is quite key today to make sure that you're setting yourselves up from a foundational perspective to then actually be able to leverage these types of advancements that are also coming down the line. But one thing we know for absolute certain within this year and next year is that we are exiting the era of pure play proof of concepts and experimentation and entering the era of production and embedding scaling generative AI use cases. So the time to tackle these challenges is now.
So one final message that I want to leave with you today is the importance of education. We are all at the conference today. We're all getting the latest insights. We're all understanding where the technology is going, the future predictions of the technology, but we don't have the whole workforce with us. So what we're going to share is a number of Institute of Business Value studies that we have available within IBM. There will be a QR code at the end of the presentation, and that will be available in pretty short time period after this presentation. But there's a number of examples that have recently been published, including how to augment your work, including the ethical implications of AI, and including generating a return on investment of your proof of concepts into production. We also publish a number of courses on Coursera, and over the last week we've published some refresh courses, including Generative AI for Project Managers, Generative AI for NLU, NLP, so definitely check those out. There's a wide range of courses on Coursera that are all available for free. They're a couple of hours long, so they're not too time intensive, but that's one way that we can really bridge the skill gap to make sure everybody is on the generative AI journey with us. We are over at stand 521, the big blue stand just outside here. So if you do have any questions, Holly and I will be there for the next half an hour or so throughout the day. We have some fantastic IBM team members there throughout the day as well. But thank you very much for joining us this morning, and we hope you found this insightful. Thank you.